$12.47. That's your balance, not your savings. Your balance. You check it at 11:43 p.m., lying on a mattress you bought secondhand from someone on Facebook Marketplace. You check it again at 11:44. The number doesn't change. You have $31,000 in student loans, $4,200 on a credit card, and a direct deposit that hits on Friday that is already spent. You are 23 years old. You are not behind. You tell yourself you are not behind. But every grocery run is a calculation. You put the olive oil back. You buy the store brand. You split a streaming password with someone you don't particularly like anymore because canceling feels like losing ground. This is what zero feels like. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a low, constant hum of arithmetic running underneath everything you do. You don't talk about money. Nobody does at this level, but everybody is doing the same math. You watch your bank app more than your messages. You know your account number by heart. You move $200 to savings and move it back 3 days later. This is the level where money is not a tool. Money is the air. Either you have enough or you're already suffocating, and you can't always tell which one it is. The first rule, at zero. Your relationship with money is entirely emotional, and emotional decisions compound in the wrong direction. You get the raise, not a big one, $6,000 a year before tax. It lands as $387 extra per month. You felt rich for approximately one afternoon. Then the car needs $900 in brake pads and rotors. You learn that expenses expand to meet whatever space you make for them. You pay off the smallest card, $1,200. You screenshot the zero balance. You send it to nobody because nobody would understand why this screenshot means what it means to you. But it means everything. Because for the first time, a number moved in the right direction because of a decision you made. That's the beginning. You crossed $10,000 in savings for the first time. You're 26. You've never had 5 figures before, not once. You check the balance constantly for the first week. Not out of anxiety this time, out of disbelief. You don't do anything with it. You just let it sit there. The psychological weight of $10,000 when you've never had it is disproportionate to the number itself. You feel like you've crossed into a different category of person. You haven't. But you feel it. You start reading. Not self-help, not motivation, actual books about how money moves. You learn what an index fund is. You open a brokerage account and stare at it for 3 weeks before you put anything in. You invest $1,500. The market dips the next day. You almost pull it out. You don't. This is the moment you decide whether fear runs your decisions or you do. The shift. You stop thinking about money as safety and start thinking about money as information. You're making $68,000 a year. Now you've got $40,000 saved. You have a Roth IRA you're actually contributing to. You feel by most measures fine, stable. You're doing what you were told to do. Max the 401k. Build an emergency fund. Avoid lifestyle inflation. You're doing all of it. And then you sit down and run the numbers honestly all the way out. You type the projections into a spreadsheet at midnight, and you stare at what 40 years of disciplined saving at your current income looks like, and something shifts in your chest because the number at the end is not what you thought it was. It's fine. It's enough. It is not what you want. This is the competence plateau. You are good at surviving. You are not yet good at building. The second rule, salary is a ceiling dressed up as a floor. The moment you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. You start a side project. You don't call it a business. It's just a thing you do on weekends that makes $400 a month, then $900, then $1,700. You don't tell your employer. You don't tell most people. You reinvest everything back into it for 14 months. You eat the same lunches. You don't upgrade anything. Your net worth crosses $80,000. then $110,000. You start feeling the gap between where you are and where a salary alone would have taken you. The gap is where the leverage lives. Your investments return $3,800 in a single year without you doing anything. You've had months where your side income was higher than your paycheck. You know what an asset is now, not theoretically. Physically, something you built or bought that earns while you sleep. Your relationship with time changes. You start measuring hours differently. Every hour spent on something that doesn't compound is an hour the machine isn't running. You cross $150,000 in net worth, you're 32. You have a rental property with $44,000 in equity, a brokerage account sitting at $61,000, a business generating $6,200 a month. You still drive the same car. You don't tell people about any of this. You've noticed that talking about money at this level makes people strange, either envious or dismissive. Neither is useful. You start saying no to things that used to be automatic yeses. A destination wedding you can't afford without liquidating something. A group holiday where everyone splits cost equally, and you'd be subsidizing 3 people. A business opportunity pitched by a friend who doesn't understand cash flow. No. You feel the friction in the relationships. You feel it, and you stay quiet, and you say no anyway. The shift. You stop spending money to maintain relationships and start protecting capital to build options. At $300,000, your money is starting to have a personality. It has preferences. It wants to go certain places and resists others. You've had one investment return $22,000 in 8 months. You've had one lose $9,400. You don't panic about the loss. Not because you don't care about $9,400. You do, but because you understand now that this is the cost of being in the game. You don't pull back. You reposition. This is what the people at the bottom think. The people at the top don't understand. They think the top is about avoiding risk. It's not. It's about choosing which risks are worth sitting with. The third rule: below $500,000, you are still buying assets. Above it, assets start buying each other. You are close. You can feel it the way you feel a room before you walk into it. $670,000, $810,000. You've restructured the business twice, brought on a partner, exited one investment, and rolled the proceeds into something bigger. You are 36. Your net worth is $920,000. You stop sleeping as well as you used to, not from stress, from intensity. You're running scenarios in the shower. You're sending emails at 5:30 a.m. to people in different time zones. You turned down a job offer that would have paid $210,000 a year in salary. Your parents don't understand. You don't explain it fully. You tell them it didn't feel right. That's partially true. Then it happens. A Tuesday. Nothing ceremonial about it. Your brokerage updates, and the number is $1, 40,000. You sit with it for a moment. You thought you'd feel different. You thought there'd be something. There's a quiet satisfaction, and then almost immediately it's not enough. Not in a frantic way. In a clear, practical way. $1 million at a 4% return is $40,000 a year. That's not freedom. That's a starting point. The identity crisis isn't that you're not happy. It's that happiness was never the point, and you're only just admitting that to yourself. The shift. The millionaire arrives and realizes the milestone was never the destination. It was the proof of concept. You stop going to events you used to attend to feel connected to something. The startup meetups, the finance seminars, the networking happy hours where everyone talks about what they're building and nobody talks about what it costs them. You don't have contempt for it. You just don't need it. You are building something now that exists in a different conversation. And that conversation happens in smaller rooms with fewer people and no name badges. At $2.3 million, money stops being a source of anxiety entirely. For the first time in your adult life, it is simply a resource. The way time is a resource, the way attention is a resource. You don't think about your checking balance. You think about allocation. Where is the capital positioned? What is its return profile? What are you not seeing? You hire a wealth manager, then fire him when you realize you know more than he does about your own situation. You find someone better, someone who charges more and talks less and has clients you've heard of. Your business does $4.1 million in revenue. You own 2 rental properties with a combined equity position of $380,000. Your portfolio is at $1.6 million. You are not rich in the way people mean when they say it at dinner parties. You are wealthy in the way that means you have time, actual time. You take a 3-week trip. You do not check email for 5 days of it. This is the thing people cannot buy at lower levels. Not the trip, the 5 days. The 4th rule, wealth is not what you accumulate. It's what you no longer have to do. At $5 million, the game changes texture. It's no longer about building. It's about positioning. You are moving capital now, not working for it. The distinction sounds small. It is enormous. You are in a deal that will return $800,000 in 18 months. You are in another that might return nothing. You know the difference between them, and you're in both anyway, because one de-risks the other, and the correlation between them is the actual trade. This is not a sentence you could have understood 4 years ago. You start meeting people who are at $20 million, $50 million. You study them the way you studied the $10K mark from zero. You watch how they think, not what they own, how they think. The pace is different. The patience is longer. They are not trying to win each hand. They are trying to stay in the game longer than everyone else at the table. You stop talking about money with people who don't have it. Not out of arrogance, out of accuracy. The conversations become imprecise. People project. They assign meaning to numbers that the numbers don't carry. At this level, $500,000 is a position size. It is not a life-changing sum. Saying that in the wrong room makes you someone's villain, so you don't say it. At $14 million, you walk into rooms you used to only read about. Not celebrity rooms. Rooms where decisions are made. A meeting with a family office managing $600 million who wants to co-invest alongside you. A call with a private equity firm looking for operating partners on a platform acquisition. You are at the table not because you were invited as a courtesy, but because your capital and your pattern recognition are genuinely useful to the people in the room. That is a different experience of being powerful. The 5th rule, at $10 million, your reputation becomes a financial instrument. It earns returns independent of your decisions. You make a decision that you would have described as morally complicated 5 years ago. A company you're invested in restructures its workforce, 140 people. You know the CFO. You've had dinner with him. You don't call him about the layoffs. You review the cap table. You hold. The company's margin profile improves. Your position increases in value. You don't feel good about it. You don't feel bad about it. Not for long. You feel the distance, the thing that grows as the numbers grow. The gap between your decisions and their consequences widens. And the widening happens quietly, and you don't resist it. Your net worth crosses $30 million. You are 54. You have structures in place that will outlive you, a trust that protects the assets, a foundation that costs you $800,000 a year and functions partly as access. You are invited places because of what you represent and what you can write a check for. You understand this. You don't pretend otherwise. You've stopped pretending about most things. Pretending costs energy, and energy is the only currency that doesn't compound. The shift at this level, the game no longer requires your full presence. It requires your positioning. You could leave for 6 months, and the machine would run. That is what the machine was always for. Capital moves because you breathe. You wake up and there are decisions being executed by people you've trusted with frameworks you built over a decade. You own pieces of 11 companies. You have a direct line to people who set policy, not politicians. Policy. You don't lobby. You advise. The distinction matters to you. Maybe it should matter more. At $80 million, the isolation is not loneliness. It's a different problem. The people in your life exist at a remove from what your reality is. Your closest friendships are with people who operate in the same altitude, not by design, by natural selection of conversation. The things that absorb your attention, fund structure, regulatory positioning, dynasty trusts, secondaries, carve-outs, simply don't translate. You're not a different person. You're a person whose context has become untranslatable to most people who knew you before. You give more than you ever have. Not for reputation, not for the foundation access, though you understand that's part of it. You give because at this level, money has stopped being a measure of anything meaningful about you. And giving is one of the remaining things that still feels like a decision, like it means something. The sixth rule: above $50 million, money stops measuring your worth. It starts measuring your reach. You are 61. Your net worth is $94 million. The exact figure is known to 3 people. You have not worked a conventional day in 9 years. You have not stopped working. You think in cycles now, not quarters, not years. Cycles, demographic cycles, infrastructure cycles, credit cycles. You position ahead of them the way a sailor reads weather 3 days out. You are sometimes wrong. Being wrong at this level means a position underperforms by 200 basis points and you rebalance. It does not mean your life changes. There is a board meeting. 5 people in a room with enough combined capital to reshape a mid-sized economy. You speak for 4 minutes. You ask 2 questions. The room moves around those questions. You leave before the lunch is served. This is power at its most compressed. No spectacle, no volume, just a room that calibrates to your position. And somewhere in this city right now, there is a 2-4-year-old opening a banking app for the first time. His balance is $12.47. He's standing in line at a grocery store doing the math. He puts the good coffee back. He gets the store brand. He thinks this is a story about money. He thinks if he just makes more of it, something will resolve. He doesn't know yet what has to resolve. He doesn't know what it will cost. Not in dollars, in distance. In the gap that opens between who you are at the beginning and who you have to become to reach the end, the machine doesn't ask if you're ready, doesn't ask if the trade is worth it. It opens every morning and it takes whoever shows up. And whoever shows up consistently, patiently, without flinching, without stopping to ask the question everyone else is asking, they compound. The money compounds and so does everything else. The balance is $12.47. It always starts there. It always will.